They laughed at him, called him a foreigner, mocked his strange accent. But little did they know, this scrawny, awkward boy from a tiny island would one day shake the world. Before he became Emperor of France, before he led legendary battles, before his name echoed through history, Napoleon Bonaparte was just a boy with big dreams and even bigger obstacles. This is the untold story of Napoleon before he ruled. Napoleon Bonaparte. The man, the myth, the military genius. We all know the stories of his conquests, his rise to power, his dramatic downfall. But how did he even get there? What shaped him into one of history's most ambitious leaders? To understand Napoleon, we have to go back to a time when he was just a boy, struggling to fit in, fighting to prove himself, and laying the foundation for his destiny. Because no empire is built in a day, and no leader achieves greatness without facing challenges. In the late 18th century, amidst the turbulence of revolution and war, a young Corsican boy, born into a family of minor nobility, would rise to shape the destiny of Europe. Napoleon Bonaparte, a name now synonymous with conquest and ambition, was born on August 15, 1769, on the island of Corsica, just a year after France acquired it from the Republic of Genoa. The island's transition from Italian to French rule played a significant role in shaping his identity. He would always carry a Corsican accent, a lingering reminder of his roots, even as he commanded the armies of France. The Corsica of Napoleon's youth was a rugged, mountainous island with fierce traditions of independence and honor. For centuries, Corsicans had resisted foreign rule, be it Genoese, French, or otherwise, and prided themselves on their resilience. The Bonaparte family, originally Buonaparte, before Napoleon later Gallicized the name, were not wealthy by mainland standards. But on the island, they held respect and position. Napoleon's father, Carlo, served as a representative to the court of Louis XVI, a position that gave young Napoleon his first taste of politics and power dynamics. His mother, Letizia Ramolino, cast perhaps an even longer shadow over the future emperor's character. Tough, resourceful, and unyielding, she raised 8 children who survived infancy, instilling in them, particularly in Napoleon, a sense of family loyalty that bordered on the fanatical. She had a man's head on a woman's body, Napoleon would later remark of his mother. From her, he inherited not just his famous intensity and drive, but a pragmatic view of survival. When resources grew scarce, Letizia would ration food strictly, even when the family could afford more. "You never know what tomorrow might bring," she would say. Unlike the towering image of the ruthless general and emperor that history often portrays, Napoleon's childhood was marked by frailty and isolation. He was not the imposing figure we often imagine, but rather a small, thin boy, often sickly and deeply introverted. Yet, beneath this delicate frame lay an insatiable curiosity and an exceptional mind. His father, Carlo Bonaparte, a lawyer with ambitions of his own, secured a scholarship for Napoleon at the Brienne Military Academy in mainland France, where the young Corsican struggled at first to fit in among his aristocratic peers. He was mocked for his accent, his manners, and even his origins, an outsider among the elite. It was this isolation, this sense of otherness, that fueled his drive. He devoured books on history and military strategy, idolizing figures such as Julius Caesar and Alexander the Great. The journey from Corsica to Brienne was Napoleon's first real departure from home. A 9-year-old boy crossing the Mediterranean, leaving behind the sun-baked limestone hills of his island for the cool, misty plains of mainland France. The culture shock was immediate and jarring. France was not just another country. It was another world, with different customs, different expectations, different ways of being. At Brienne, the young Napoleon found himself surrounded by the sons of the French aristocracy, boys who had been groomed from birth for positions of power, and who looked down on this provincial outsider with his thick accent and awkward manners. The taunts were relentless. Palonaise, which means straw in the nose, they called him, a cruel play on his name. The Corsican was uttered with sneering disdain. During winters, when the school grounds were covered in snow, Napoleon would find himself alone while the other boys played. In one famous incident during a snowball fight, he organized the outcast students into a disciplined army, built snow fortifications, and led a tactical assault against the popular students. A small glimpse of the strategic genius that would later reshape Europe. But the isolation cut deep. In letters home, which were infrequent due to the expensive postage, Napoleon expressed a fierce homesickness and an even fiercer pride in his Corsican heritage. "I will do these Frenchmen all the harm I can," he wrote in one youthful outburst. Ironically, This outsider status forced him to develop the very traits that would later make him exceptional: self-reliance, intense focus, and an ability to analyze systems and structures from the outside. While his classmates played and socialized, Napoleon retreated into the world of books. The school library became his sanctuary. There, among the dusty tomes, he found companions more loyal than any flesh and blood friends: Plutarch's heroes, the campaigns of Caesar, the conquests of Alexander. History became not just a subject but an obsession. He would trace the movements of ancient armies on maps, analyzing their strategies, imagining how he might have commanded differently. One of the lesser-known aspects of Napoleon's early years is his deep love for mathematics. At Brienne, he excelled in the subject, so much so that some of his instructors believed he had the potential to become a distinguished mathematician rather than a soldier. His analytical mind and attention to detail later translated into his military strategies, allowing him to make quick, decisive movements on the battlefield. However, even as he mastered the sciences, his heart belonged to war. Mathematics offered Napoleon something that human relationships could not: certainty, order, logic. In numbers, there were no betrayals, no mockery, no shifting loyalties, only pure, clean truth. His notebooks from this period reveal a mind constantly calculating. This mathematical precision would later inform everything from his military movements to his governmental reforms. Napoleon understood that warfare, like mathematics, was about patterns and probabilities, about seeing the relationships between seemingly disparate elements. Even his physical appearance set him apart. While the aristocratic French youth of the time were tall, well-fed, and groomed for society, Napoleon was small for his age, with a sallow complexion that spoke of his Mediterranean origins. His hair was not fashionably powdered, but fell in dark, sometimes unkempt locks. Yet there was something in his gaze, an intensity, a focus, that made even his tormentors occasionally uneasy. One instructor noted, "There is granite, heated by a volcano. Who knows what it will become when it cools?" At 16, he was admitted to the École Militaire in Paris, a prestigious institution, but his time there was cut short. His father's death left the family in financial distress, and Napoleon completed the rigorous program in just 1 year instead of the usual 2. He graduated as a second lieutenant in the artillery, a branch of the military that required a keen mind and a technical understanding of trajectory. While most young officers sought positions in cavalry or infantry for prestige, Napoleon recognized the power of artillery, a decision that would later prove instrumental in his rise to power. Carlo's death in 1785 from stomach cancer was a turning point for the 16-year-old Napoleon. As the oldest son present, his brother Joseph was in Italy. Napoleon suddenly found himself the head of the family. The modest pension left by his father was barely enough to support his mother and younger siblings. Napoleon felt the heat of financial stress, pushing him to finish his studies at the École Militaire in just 1 year instead of 2. His instructors were astonished, not just by the pace, but by the quality of his work. In his final examinations, particularly in mathematics and artillery tactics, he scored among the highest in his class. The artillery, though lacking the glamour of the cavalry or the prestige of the infantry, suited Napoleon's temperament and talents perfectly. It was a technical branch, requiring precision, calculation, and a deep understanding of trajectory and timing. More importantly, it was a branch where merit mattered more than birthright, where a Corsican commoner could rise on ability alone. Napoleon immersed himself in ballistics, studying the weight of cannonballs, the composition of gunpowder, the angle of fire needed to achieve maximum range. While other young officers spent their evenings in Paris's salons and theaters, Napoleon could be found in his sparse quarters, surrounded by technical manuals and historical texts on warfare. His first posting as a second lieutenant took him to Valence, a sleepy garrison town along the Rhine. The pattern established at Brienne continued: isolation, study, and an inner fire that those around him sensed, but could not fully comprehend. He lived frugally, sending much of his modest officer's salary home to support his mother and siblings. Yet even in this provincial backwater, Napoleon found ways to prepare for the future he envisioned for himself. He entered an essay contest held by the Academy of Lyon, writing on the subject of happiness. Though he did not win, the essay revealed a mind grappling with grand philosophical questions and a heart yearning for glory. The revolution that would eventually catapult him to power was still years away, but already, the young lieutenant was positioning himself, intellectually, emotionally, strategically, for the moment when opportunity would knock, and when it did, he would be ready, forged in the fires of isolation, hardened by mockery, and driven by an unquenchable thirst to prove himself to the world that had once laughed at the small boy with the strange accent. Despite his early ambitions, Napoleon's career did not immediately take off. He was stationed in various garrisons, enduring long periods of idleness and frustration. He went back to Corsica and plunged into local politics, siding with the pro-French faction against Pasquale Paoli, the Corsican nationalist leader. This decision effectively made him an exile from his homeland, forcing him to fully embrace his French identity. It was an ironic twist. He had once considered Corsica his true home, but now he was forever tethered to France. Napoleon's time between graduating from military school and his rise to prominence were marked by a peculiar rhythm of tedium and tumult. Stationed first in Valence, then Exan, the young lieutenant found garrison life stifling. His fellow officers, mostly scions of noble families, spent their days hunting, gambling, and courting local women. Napoleon, ever the outsider, retreated into his books and his increasingly ambitious writings. During this period, he began work on a history of Corsica, a project that revealed both his literary aspirations and his lingering attachment to his homeland. The financial strain on the Bonaparte family continued to weigh heavily on him. With his meager lieutenant's salary, Napoleon struggled to support himself while also sending money home. He ate sparingly, often skipping meals to save money for books or to send to his mother. This frugality became such a habit that even at the height of his power, when he commanded the wealth of an empire, Napoleon retained a certain asceticism in his personal habits. When the French Revolution began in 1789, Napoleon was on leave in Corsica. For the ambitious young officer, the political upheaval in France presented both danger and opportunity. The old order was collapsing. Aristocratic officers were fleeing the army, creating vacancies that men of talent might fill. Yet the revolution also threatened to tear apart the very institution, the French military, to which Napoleon had committed his future. His return to Corsica during this period marked a complex chapter in his relationship with his homeland. The island was experiencing its own political turmoil, mirroring the revolutionary fervor on the mainland. Pasquale Paoli, the exiled Corsican leader, had returned to the island and was pushing for greater autonomy. Initially, Napoleon and his family supported Paoli, seeing in him a champion of Corsican rights. But as revolutionary France shifted toward a more radical phase, and as Paoli began to favor breaking ties with France entirely, Napoleon found himself in an increasingly untenable position. The Bonaparte family, despite their Corsican roots, had benefited from French patronage. Napoleon's education, his military commission, his very future were all bound to France. More pragmatically, he recognized that Corsica, a small island with limited resources, could not hope to stand independently against the great powers of Europe. His decision to side with the French commissioners against Paoli was not made lightly, but it reflected Napoleon's emerging worldview. Better to align with the rising tide of history than to be swept away by it. The consequences of this choice were immediate and devastating. Paoli's supporters, viewing Napoleon as a traitor to the Corsican cause, attacked the Bonaparte family home. The family was forced to flee Ajaccio in the dead of night, taking only what they could carry. Napoleon, his mother, and his siblings escaped to the French mainland, leaving behind not just their property but their entire sense of belonging. From that moment on, Bonaparte was a man without a homeland, an exile, who would never truly feel at home anywhere except at the head of an army. This sense of statelessness may help explain the fervor with which Napoleon embraced France, not as the land of his birth, but as the vessel for his ambitions. France was not his native soil, but it was the soil from which his dreams of glory might grow. If he could not be Corsican, he would be more French than the French themselves. It wasn't until the French Revolution erupted in 1789 that Napoleon found his opportunity. While the country descended into chaos, he saw a chance to prove himself. His big break happened in 1793 during the Toulon siege, a royalist stronghold supported by the British Navy. Napoleon, still a relatively unknown officer, devised a brilliant plan to recapture the city by seizing the surrounding high ground and bombarding the enemy fleet. His strategy worked flawlessly, and Toulon fell. The victory earned him a promotion to brigadier general at just 24 years old. The Toulon campaign revealed the full measure of Napoleon's military genius. The city had revolted against the revolutionary government and invited in British and Spanish forces. Previous Republican generals had attacked the city directly, only to be repulsed with heavy casualties. Napoleon, examining the situation with his characteristic analytical eye, immediately identified the key to victory: les galettes, a promontory overlooking the harbor where the British fleet was anchored. Toulon is there, he reportedly said, pointing to this strategic position. If Republican artillery could be placed on that height, they could force the British fleet to withdraw, leaving the royalist insurgents without support. His superiors, many of them political appointees with little military experience, were skeptical of this plan presented by a lowly artillery captain. But Napoleon persisted, articulating his strategy with such conviction that he eventually won approval. The assault on La Galette was a masterpiece of coordination between infantry and artillery. In the midst of the battle, Napoleon himself took direct command after the officer leading the attack was wounded. Exposing himself to enemy fire, he rallied the troops and directed the placement of the guns. A bayonet thrust grazed his thigh, and a British horse was shot out from under him, but he pressed on. By morning, Republican forces held the promontory, and as Napoleon had predicted, the British fleet, now under direct fire, was forced to withdraw, taking with them as many royalist refugees as they could carry. What followed was a brutal sack of the city, with revolutionary troops taking revenge on those seen as traitors to the Republic. Napoleon, for all his tactical brilliance, could do little to stop the bloodshed. This early experience with the horrors of urban warfare may have influenced his later preference for decisive battles in open country. The victory at Toulon catapulted Napoleon from obscurity to national attention. His promotion to brigadier general at the age of 24 was remarkable, even in an era when revolution had opened the way for rapid advancement. Yet Toulon also taught Napoleon valuable lessons about the intersection of military skill and political survival. His report on the battle carefully emphasized the collective effort while subtly highlighting his own contributions. A masterful exercise in self-promotion that would become a hallmark of his career. But Napoleon's fortunes were fickle. The revolution was a dangerous time, and political tides shifted unpredictably. He spent some time in jail in 1794 when Robespierre fell, thought to be too close to the radical Jacobins. It was only through sheer luck and political maneuvering that he escaped execution, a fate that had claimed so many of his contemporaries. Yet, rather than retreat, he emerged from prison even more determined. The Thermidorian reaction, which followed Robespierre's fall, swept away many who had been associated with the terror. Napoleon, once backed by Robespierre's brother Augustin, suddenly found himself on dangerous ground. His arrest came just as he was preparing to take command of French artillery forces in Italy, a cruel twist of fate for a man on the cusp of his first major independent command. The 13 days that Napoleon spent in prison at Fort Carry in Antibes were perhaps the darkest of his early life. The cell was damp and cold, conditions that aggravated his already fragile health. More agonizing than the physical discomfort was the uncertainty. Each day might bring release or a journey to the guillotine. Many of his contemporaries, facing similar accusations, chose suicide rather than endure the humiliation of public execution. Napoleon characteristically chose a different path. From his cell, he wrote a passionate defense of his revolutionary credentials, emphasizing his service at Toulon and his loyalty to the Republic. The document revealed both his political astuteness and his emerging skill as a writer who could shape his own narrative. Whether due to this defense, to the intervention of powerful friends like Paul Barras, or simply to the overwhelming number of cases awaiting the Revolutionary Tribunal, Napoleon was eventually released without formal charges. The experience of imprisonment left deep marks on the young general. He emerged with a heightened awareness of political vulnerability and a determination never again to be at the mercy of shifting political winds. Perhaps most significantly, he developed a profound skepticism about revolutionary idealism. The Republic had given him his opportunity, but it had also shown him how quickly fortune could reverse. From this point forward, Napoleon would be guided less by ideology than by a pragmatic assessment of where power lay, and how it might be harnessed to his advantage. Upon his release, Napoleon found himself without a command and forced to report to the Bureau of Topography in Paris, effectively a demotion to a desk job. It was during this period of professional limbo that he penned his famous response when asked if he might be able to defend the Republic. "I will undertake to bring you the head of a king, but not 1 ounce of soil." Despite his confidence, Napoleon was in a precarious position, living in cheap lodgings and sometimes pawning his belongings to afford meals. He even contemplated offering his services to the Ottoman Empire, which was seeking European officers to modernize its military. It was a moment of genuine crisis in his career. The brilliant young general reduced to contemplating foreign service just to survive. Another little-known fact about Napoleon is that his meteoric rise was almost derailed by love. In his youth, he was deeply enamored with a woman named Desiree Clary, the daughter of a wealthy silk merchant. The romance was intense but short-lived. Desiree would later marry one of Napoleon's generals and eventually become the Queen of Sweden. Instead, Napoleon set his sights on Josephine de Beauharnais, a widow with 2 children who was 6 years his senior. Their relationship was tempestuous, passionate, and at times, deeply dysfunctional. Josephine was unfaithful early in their marriage, and Napoleon, despite his own later infidelities, never truly forgave her. Yet, his love for her was undeniable. He wrote her countless letters, filled with longing and jealousy, even while on campaign. The affair with Desiree Clary began during Napoleon's time in Marseille, where the Bonaparte family had sought refuge after fleeing Corsica. The Clary family, wealthy silk merchants, took an interest in the exiled Bonapartes, offering them financial support and social connections. Joseph Bonaparte married Desiree's sister Julie, creating a family alliance that would prove beneficial in years to come. Napoleon's courtship of Desiree was as methodical as his military campaigns. He wrote her carefully crafted letters, blending romantic sentiment with intellectual discourse. For a time, it seemed a match would proceed, with formal engagement announced and marriage plans discussed. Yet as Napoleon's star began to rise after Toulon, his attentions cooled. Whether his heart truly changed or whether he recognized that his ambition might require a different sort of partner remains one of the enigmas of his personal life. The break with Desiree coincided with Napoleon's introduction to Josephine de Beauharnais, a woman who represented everything Desiree was not. Where Desiree was young and relatively innocent, Josephine was mature and worldly. Where Desiree came from a wealthy but provincial merchant family, Josephine moved in the highest Parisian social circles. Most critically, while Desiree might have made a supportive wife, Josephine offered connections to Paul Barras and other powerful figures in the Directory government. Connections that a rising young general desperately needed. The attraction was immediate and overwhelming, at least on Napoleon's part. His letters to Josephine during their courtship and early marriage reveal a man consumed by passion to the point of distraction. Your portrait and the intoxicating evening yesterday have left my senses in turmoil. Sweet, incomparable, Josephine, what a strange effect you have on my heart. Josephine's feelings were more complex. 6 years older than Napoleon, she had already experienced the highs and lows of love and marriage. Her first husband, Alexandre de Beauharnais, had been guillotined during the Terror, leaving her with 2 children and precarious finances. For her, marriage to the promising young general offered security and stability more than romantic passion. Their wedding on March 9, 1796, was a hastily arranged civil ceremony. Napoleon, impatient as always, arrived 2 hours late, and the entire service lasted less than 10 minutes. Josephine's age was falsified on the certificate, reducing the gap between them from 6 years to 4. It was an inauspicious beginning to a relationship that would shape both their destinies and, in many ways, the fate of Europe. 2 days after the wedding, Napoleon left to take command of the army of Italy, beginning his legendary campaign. But even amidst the demands of leadership and the chaos of battle, his thoughts constantly returned to Josephine. He wrote to her almost daily, pouring out his heart in letters that mixed declarations of love with increasingly desperate pleas for her to join him in Italy. Josephine, however, was in no hurry to leave the social world of Paris for the uncertainties of a military campaign. Worse, rumors soon reached Napoleon that she was being unfaithful in his absence. The jealousy that these rumors inspired was all-consuming, driving Napoleon to distraction even as he was achieving his greatest military victories. "I don't love you anymore. On the contrary, I detest you," he wrote in one moment of fury, only to follow with renewed protestations of devotion. When Josephine finally did join Napoleon in Italy, the reunion was passionate but brief. She soon returned to Paris, where her behavior continued to fuel gossip. Yet despite the pain her infidelities caused him, Napoleon could never bring himself to break with her completely. She had become, in a sense, his lucky charm. His star had risen after their marriage, and some superstitious part of him feared that without her, his fortunes might fall. This complex dance of love, betrayal, jealousy, and reconciliation would continue throughout their marriage, even as Napoleon ascended to heights of power that neither of them could have imagined when they first met. In Josephine, Napoleon had found not just a wife but a mirror reflecting both his greatest strengths and his most human vulnerabilities, a reminder that even the man who would conquer Europe could be conquered by his own heart. His next great moment came in 1796, when he was given command of the French army in Italy. What followed was a campaign that cemented his reputation as a military genius, with a combination of bold tactics, rapid movements, and psychological warfare. He transformed a demoralized and underfunded army into an unstoppable force. He crushed the Austrian and Piedmontese forces, securing French dominance in Italy. One of his greatest strengths was his ability to inspire loyalty among his troops. Unlike many generals of his time, he marched alongside his men, endured their hardships, and spoke to them not as a distant leader but as a comrade. When Napoleon arrived at the headquarters of the Army of Italy in Nice, he found a force in disarray. Soldiers were ragged, hungry, and unpaid. Desertions were common, and morale was abysmal. The generals, many of them older and more experienced than Napoleon, regarded their new commander with undisguised skepticism. How could this small, thin young man, barely 26 years old, lead them to victory against the combined might of Austria and Piedmont Sardinia? Napoleon's first address to his troops revealed his understanding of human psychology. Rather than dwelling on abstract revolutionary ideals, he spoke directly to their immediate concerns and aspirations. Soldiers, you are naked, ill-fed. The government owes you much. It can give you nothing. I will lead you into the most fertile plains in the world. Rich provinces, great cities will be in your power. There you will find honor, glory, and riches. It was a promise both pragmatic and visionary, a perfect encapsulation of Napoleon's leadership style. Within days, he had reorganized the army, consolidating scattered divisions and creating a more flexible command structure. His strategy was revolutionary. Rather than engage the numerically superior enemy forces as a single unit, he would use speed and maneuverability to attack isolated portions of the enemy army in sequence, defeating each before reinforcements could arrive. The campaign that followed was a masterclass in military innovation. Ad Montanat Millesimo, Antigo, Napoleon struck with lightning speed, driving wedges between the Austrian and Piedmontese forces. After forcing Piedmont to sue for peace, he turned his full attention to the Austrians, pursuing them across northern Italy. At Lodi, his troops witnessed his personal courage when he walked through artillery fire on a narrow bridge, earning him the nickname, the Little Corporal, a term of affection that acknowledged both his small stature and his willingness to share his men's dangers. His Italian campaign also revealed another side of Napoleon, his skill as a propagandist. He meticulously crafted reports of his victories, exaggerating his successes and downplaying his failures. These dispatches, published in French newspapers, turned him into a national hero. By the time he returned to Paris, he was not just a general, he was a legend in the making. Napoleon understood the power of the emerging mass media in shaping public opinion. His bulletins from the front were masterpieces of political communication, blending factual accounts of victories with carefully crafted narratives that emphasized his role as the architect of success. He established his own newspaper, ensuring that soldiers and civilians alike received news framed exactly as he wished it to be presented. Beyond military triumphs, Napoleon's time in Italy revealed his skill as a diplomat and civil administrator. He negotiated treaties, reorganized conquered territories, and oversaw the collection of war indemnities and artistic treasures for shipment to France. He created client republics that nominally embraced revolutionary principles while actually serving French interests. In these early administrative efforts, we can see the seeds of the comprehensive legal and bureaucratic reforms he would later implement across Europe. Yet, Napoleon was never content with mere military success. He yearned for greater power, and his opportunity came in 1799 when the French government, the Directory, was weak and deeply unpopular. With a carefully orchestrated coup, he seized control, becoming first consul of France. It was a remarkable transformation, from an obscure Corsican outsider to the most powerful man in France, all within a decade. The coup of 18 Brumaire, November 9, 1799, revealed Napoleon at his most politically astute. Working with his brother Lucien and the wily diplomat Talleyrand, he orchestrated a takeover that had the appearance of legality while ultimately resting on military force. When legislators resisted, grenadiers cleared the chamber. The next day, a rump parliament voted to replace the Directory with a three-man consulate, with Napoleon as first consul, holding virtually all executive power. As first consul, Napoleon moved swiftly to consolidate his authority while projecting an image of moderation and national reconciliation. He offered amnesty to émigrés who would return and pledge loyalty to the new regime. He negotiated a concordat with the Catholic Church, healing one of the deepest wounds of the revolutionary period. Most significantly, he initiated the drafting of the Civil Code, a comprehensive legal framework that balanced revolutionary principles with practical governance. But the final step of his rise, the one that would etch his name into the annals of history, came in 1804 when he crowned himself Emperor of the French. The ceremony at Notre Dame was meant to mirror the grandeur of past monarchs. But, in a dramatic and symbolic move, Napoleon took the crown from the hands of Pope Pius VII and placed it on his own head. It was a declaration. His power was not granted by the church, nor by divine right, but by his own will. Napoleon's ascension to emperor was not merely the result of ambition, but of an unparalleled ability to seize moments of opportunity, to bend circumstances to his will, and to inspire unwavering loyalty. Yet, his reign would not be one of peace. The very forces that had propelled him to power, the desire for conquest, the need for control, would ultimately lead to his downfall. But for that moment in 1804, Napoleon Bonaparte stood at the pinnacle of his power, the master of France, and the architect of his own extraordinary destiny. From a ridiculed Corsican schoolboy to Emperor of the French, Napoleon's journey represents one of history's most remarkable ascents. His legacy would extend far beyond military conquest. In his legal codes, educational reforms, and administrative systems, he laid foundations that still underpin modern European society. Though his empire would eventually crumble and his final years would be spent in exile, the boy who once stood alone in the schoolyard at Brienne had indeed fulfilled his destiny to shake the world. Thanks for joining us on Epiven, where history's most extraordinary figures and events come to life. From Napoleon's remarkable rise to other epic moments that shaped our world, we're dedicated to exploring the stories that continue to captivate and inspire. If you enjoyed this journey through Napoleon's transformation from outcast to emperor, hit that subscribe button and notification bell to catch our next historical deep dive. Remember, the most world-changing events often begin with the most unlikely heroes. Until next time, this is Epiven, where Epiv isn't just in our name, it's in every story we tell.